Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. Time for yet another show. It being 9 o'clock. And, hey, happy birthday to my dad, everybody. Check it out. You can, well, not do anything via the show, basically, but okay. At any rate, I thought I would mark the occasion and let him know. And he already knew, I think, probably. He keeps track of such things. So hectic the morning today. No production staff on hand today. Another one of those fun experiments in trying to get people to go back into the office. And just down to about once a week now at this point, so not too bad. But it also means hustling kids out the door, well, one anyway, to school this morning without the assistance of the background production crew, which is a little hectic, but managed to make the bus. It only meant that there was like no time to do anything else this morning. Like, I don't know, read a couple articles or eat something, or barely managed to get the water into the cup and down next to me for today's program. But okay, we can take a break during the last segment if Joan McCarter is free today and can stop by, and then we'll hydrate then. That will be the plan. In the meantime, lots to catch up on, of course. And many other school districts around the country effing around and finding out. And people are at home perhaps with their own production crews these days as school systems particularly where they just came off of raucous school board meetings where protesters insisted that there had to be a return to school where the kids were maskless. And, days or occasionally weeks later, they are closing the schools regardless because everybody is out sick. Just happened to, see another such report crossing the Twitter transom today. It's happening, of course, at dozens of school systems around the country. This one just happened to make it on my screen, but down in Texas, where nothing bad ever happens because the governor totally knows exactly what he's doing. Just one of those things. Anyway, it occurred to me this morning, actually, in thinking about this stuff, especially with some school systems saying, well, we ought to return to online remote instruction in order to give our staff a chance to nurse themselves back to health or, and otherwise get back on their feet and get things under control, but not have the kids fall behind. Lots of protest about that as well. But I have made mention in particular of the past couple of days of the weirdness of watching, in particular watching, guys in tactical vests protest that they're all about, they want the mask mandates dropped because something children smiles, which I never really thought was a motivating factor for those kinds of guys. But on top of that, angry parents, although what's weird also, you'll find that there are lots of write-ups of angry parents showing up at school board meetings and screaming about mask mandates and vaccine mandates and CRT and everything else, only to find out that they are, I don't have any kids in the school system. I homeschool my kids, which is a point of pride for them. But nonetheless, they're there to protest how everybody else's kids are getting educated. Out of, I guess, some sense of weird sense of altruism about just how the school system should work. You could have that. Of course, I'm beginning to suspect that it's just, this is somebody who really, for whatever reason, dislikes the public school system for whatever their private reasons are. And so they take it out on the public school system every chance they get. They pull their kids out and, I guess that's standing up for principle, take their kids out and homeschool them, but then show up to protest public school curricula, which is really not an area of interest for you normally, unless, of course, you were saying you were trying to improve it to the point where you would be comfortable returning your kids to public school. And I'm sure you can come up with that excuse. Anyway, you very frequently see, I feel like you very frequently see these write-ups where people who don't even have a stake currently anyway in the public school system, they're protesting it nonetheless, and over masks and vaccines and anything else. And I think they're just taking whatever opportunity there is to take a shot at the public school system, with which they're angry for some reason, usually other than the reason that they say they're there protesting. Because, of course, if you tell the reporter that you're there for another reason, they say, well, I'm here for this story, and so I'm not quoting you. So you just say, oh, I'm angry about the thing you're here to report on. Okay, sure. But anyway, it occurred to me that a lot of these parents who say that they're upset with this stuff, but also are homeschooling their kids, that very often they're there protesting, don't close the schools, we can't close the schools. The learning loss thing, the learning loss is real. Remote education, it just doesn't work, and kids need to be there with one another and to socialize with one another, and when they're there, they need to not have masks because you can't socialize unless you can see smiles, which isn't really a true thing, but whatever. They go on at great length about all of this and the learning loss in particular, the detrimental effects of this remote schooling. And then you ask them about their own kids, and then they say they're homeschooling. By the way, I don't know what percentage of people do this, but it turns out that at fairly high frequencies, like let's say, people who say that they're homeschooling their kids, it's not about, you might think, well, what an admirable thing to do, not only earning a living, and taking care of the home and taking care of the kids physically, but to dedicate yourself to teaching yourself a curriculum, familiarizing yourself with a curriculum, and the whole way through from kindergarten to 12th, if that's how long you homeschool, to familiarize yourself with a curriculum and faithfully impart it to your children day in and day out is quite an undertaking. It's real dedication. But as it turns out, that's very rarely the case in what's going on in homeschooling. And more likely the case is that they are signing up for a system, signing up for a program that they purchase online. Sometimes they purchase it with public funds. Some school systems work it out that way, that you're entitled to some amount of funds that they would otherwise have spent educating your children in the public schools, turned over to you, vouchers or whatever, and you use it to buy into one of these programs, which, by the way, very often delivers the instructional material over the internet, online. It's remote learning. And then they go to school board meetings and protest the idea of remote learning for everybody else. It's terrible for the kids and learning loss and mental health issues. But your kids are homeschooled over the internet. They don't socialize with other kids, and they're instructed over the internet remotely. Yeah, well, I didn't mean my kids. My kids are perfect. Your kids are mentally unstable now and have learning loss. But my kids are geniuses. I'm just sort of curious about that. Back in the day, cyber schooling was like innovative genius for the conservatives. Everybody had Rick Santorum did it with his own kids, by the way. You remember this story? You recall, probably, if you've been listening since forever, you would remember the stories about Rick Santorum living in Virginia, because he was a senator. I mean, there's nothing unusual about that. But living in Virginia, out this way, by the way, Loudoun County, and but maintaining a home, quote unquote, he owned a 3-bedroom house in Penn Hills, Pennsylvania. I think the house next door to his in-laws. They bought, and I mentioned it as 3 bedrooms because the Santorums had a large family. I don't remember how many kids they had, 6+ kids, I think. Not outrageous, not like television reality show size family, or normal large size family, but that would never fit in a 3-bedroom home. But they maintained that house so that they could claim residency in Penn Hills, or more importantly, that they could claim residency and claim that the local school boards were responsible for giving them the money they needed to homeschool their kids. They didn't send their kids to the schools here in Virginia. which are awesome, except as far as Youngkin is going to screw them up. But they turned back to the Penn Hills School District and said, our kids are registered for school at the address that they don't live at Penn Hills. Give us the money, and we're going to enroll our kids. So they enrolled their kids in the cyber charter school of, I think, some sort of Western Pennsylvania consortium that was available for the people who were, siphoning off public dollars from the public schools there to homeschool their kids remotely via the internet. And it was a big innovation, and he was like, I'm on the cutting edge of homeschooling technology and yada, yada. And it was a big deal. Like, he was super proud of it for a while until, of course, he got caught and people expressed the opinion that they thought it was somehow cheating for him to be siphoning off Penn Hills tuition money, essentially. Even though he says, well, I pay taxes. He pays taxes on a house that's tiny that he doesn't live in so that he can pretend he's still a resident of Pennsylvania. But okay, whatever. I mean, it was weird. It wasn't the biggest scandal in the world, but now I wonder whether, I haven't heard from Rick Santorum for a while, and that's a blessing, but I wonder whether he's been out there talking about school closures and how damaging it is and how kids need to be in school and yada yada, having homeschooled his kids over the computer. No less. I mean, how else do you attend school in Pennsylvania? Because that's one of the things that they said, well, we can send you the money for you to use for remote schooling, but ordinarily we do that so long as you're living in Pennsylvania and you're living in Virginia. And they had a fight over that. And, Santorum saying, well, I own a house in Pennsylvania. I live there. I'm just away from it for now, you see, for forever. And my kids have never lived there. But couldn't you give me the money? And because he was a prominent guy, I guess they felt like they ended up feeling like they had to give him money. And he did it. But, there's no other way to do it, even inside Pennsylvania. I mean, if the school is based in the Pittsburgh area and you're not there, but you're entitled to use public money to sign up for it, they're going to have to deliver it to you remotely. I didn't remember Rick Santorum complaining that his kids were suffering from learning losses or lack of socialization or mental health issues as a result of having to take their schooling over a computer. That was, in fact, innovative and awesome. Whereas when your kids have to do it because COVID, it's horrible and no one should ever be subjected to it. But you should all go back to school in person without masks, catching COVID like wildfire, or COVID catching like wildfire, I guess as I should say. You don't have to catch it like wildfire. That doesn't have anything. You're catching it doesn't have anything to do with fire whatsoever. But anyway, all your kids should go back. My kids, though, should stay home and learn exactly the way I said was terribly detrimental to the rest of you. Just leave it to me. All right. Anyway, I just found that kind of interesting, that was supposed to be a super awesome thing that conservatives were behind 100% when it was just them asking for public money to do this home learning remote thing. And now that everybody's in on it, well, now it just is terrible and we got to get rid of it. So that's where we stand today on the Kagro in the Morning radio show, which is live now. I could have told you that 20 minutes ago. Well, then it wouldn't have been true. But 15 minutes ago, it certainly could have been true. Bill knew it was true when he wrote it, and let's see what else we have on the schedule for today. Today, Kagro X, me, will try to empathize with what Republicans are going through by stepping into their shoes and invoking the Fifth Amendment 500 times. Yes, thank you for reminding me. A fun story from out of, where are we here? From out of hell. We don't really know. Let me pull up the Twitter screen here and scroll back. I think it was Michael Isikoff tweeting this morning. I didn't even realize he was a tweeter, but tweeting this morning that, I guess, is he at the hearing? There's a courtroom hearing. Maybe he's just monitoring it remotely, even though it will damage his mental health. A hearing for over the John Eastman emails, his emails about his crazy ass, but not totally crazy ass memo about how to upend and reverse the 2020 elections. And let's see, where's the one that caught my eye was, let's see, is this further down? He doesn't thread his tweets, so it's making it quite difficult. He doesn't understand that part. But the part that caught my eye, here we are. At a hearing on John Eastman's efforts to block the January 6th committee from getting his emails, Doug Letter, the House counsel, reveals that Eastman, the law professor who authored the memo on how Pence could block certification of the Electoral College vote, invoked the Fifth Amendment 146 times. Interesting. So a hearing on, I guess, ordering him to produce documents that he refused to turn over in, I guess he must have had an appearance before the January 6th committee at which he invoked the Fifth Amendment 146 times, which is your right constitutionally, and we can't cast aspersions about it if you're sitting on the jury, which I'm not. So therefore, aspersions cast remotely, cyber aspersions cast even. And of course, you'll recall, many of us will recall, that Donald Trump, who's peripherally involved in this hearing, by the way, that Trump has in the past insisted, of course, that, well, who takes the Fifth Amendment? Who pleads the Fifth Amendment? Guilty people. That's who. If you're innocent, what do you need the Fifth Amendment for? Mobsters plead the Fifth Amendment. And, of course, so do the people working for him, because they, too, are mobsters. And I did see other people pointing out in the same thread that Eric Trump apparently holds the Trump Circle record for invoking the Fifth Amendment some 500 plus times during the course of one of the many, litigations in which he was involved in the past. Anyway, so that sounds pretty interesting. Let's see, what else is mentioned here? Oh, yes. So at the same hearing, the lawyer for Chapman University, is that where Eastman teaches? I thought that, I don't know, for some reason I had, that he was a fellow at the Claremont Institute, so I thought maybe he was a teacher, maybe he taught at a professor teaching at Claremont McKenna, I guess. Is that the Claremont that we're talking about? Maybe not. Anyway, he teaches at Chapman University, and, I don't know, that sort of weird thing, I don't understand exactly what's going on out there. There's some weird West Coast college things where there's 5 mini colleges affiliated in one way or another, and I don't think I understand their structure there. Chapman University, it's well known and everything. I just don't know very much about it. But anyway, well, let's look it up. I'm just sort of curious about where it sits in relation to the rest of these. Chapman University, private research university in Orange, California, according to Wikipedia and whatnot. Let's see. Yeah, there we are. It encompasses 10 schools and colleges, including the Fowler School of Engineering. I mean, lots of schools have that, but it's I don't know. For some reason, I guess that's more prominent and a bigger part of the structure of the college, as opposed to just naming your department, the something school of whatever, because somebody gave you a giant donation. Okay, well, at any rate, someone who knows more about them and their structure can discuss that with you. I know nothing about it. The point, really, is that Chapman University has apparently sent their lawyer to the hearing, and the university actually supports the January 6th committee's subpoena, asking them to turn over some 19,000 emails on its server relating to the professor's representation of Trump, saying that any use of the university's server for that purpose was improper, unauthorized, and I liken it to contraband. Interesting. That's an interesting way of thinking of it. He shouldn't be using university resources to do this political work, and so they have no interest in protecting those emails, and Chapman was just, or not Chapman, but Eastman just foolish not to realize that he was using a email communication system that was not entirely within his control. It's almost as if he should have set up a private server for these things, but he didn't. And you know how that goes. You could get locked up for doing that. On the other hand, you could also get locked up for doing what he's doing. So maybe it all comes out in the wash in the end. At any rate, sounds like an interesting hearing, something to keep an eye on. Not that we can, but we also have a couple other items to catch up on, including this fun bit of information here in Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin continues to paint his face orange in the morning and insist he's not Trumpy. We've got two different approaches to disproving his assertion that he's somehow not very Trumpy. The one making the biggest circulation, or achieving the biggest circulation on Twitter this morning, everybody passing around the tweet of Rachel Cohen, writer for The Intercept, among others, who, quoting from a Washington Post article this morning under the title of Youngkin Urges Calm on his call for a ban on mask mandates, but also stokes division. Okay, well, at least there's both sides in the headline. Anyway, the grab here is about a particular initiative that I guess Youngkin is promoting, and there's a screen cap and Rachel Cohen's retyping of the key quote here. Youngkin also touted a tip line for parents to report to the state any school officials they find to be behaving objectionably, including teaching, quote, divisive subjects. Divisive or divisive, depending on your I guess it's that. Well, that's divisive in itself. Having an argument over the pronunciation. You're all fired. Yeah, and the screen grab here says, it's a quote that says, we're asking for folks, and it's okay to be doing this and disrupting people's livelihoods because you disagree with what they're teaching. Or maybe you don't even do that. Maybe it's just a kid who didn't like the grade he got or doesn't want to take the test that day. My teacher's teaching CRT. It's terrible. You got to stop it. But this is math, of course. He's giving us word problems about racism. I don't know. Just fire him already. All right, I'll call the hotline. We're asking for folks to send us reports and observations, Youngkin said. Help us be aware of, ellipses, their child being denied their rights that parents have in Virginia, which is not a sentence that makes any sense, but you see where he's trying to go. And we're going to make sure we catalog it all, ellipses. And that gives us further ability to make sure we're rooting it out. Because after all, you were elected to police every classroom and fire everybody. And there was some discussion yesterday, I guess, of the same article in which they were talking about, I guess another of the ideas is that the people would be fired and they would be creating a blacklist, a do not hire list, so that you couldn't just move to another school district in Virginia. Now you have to flee the state in order to work as a teacher. But by the way, that's some sentence. Tell us if your child is being denied their rights that parents have. Well, when parents have them, then the parents have to be denied their rights. If children have rights, go ahead and say so. You can't have children be denied rights that belong to their parents. You know what I'm saying? Okay, well, fine. They'll straighten that one out in court. Should we take a look at the actual article that's attached to this? We got that one. And, of course, we have, I guess I would say, a companion piece from the opinion side. Surprising no one, but always welcome. Eugene Robinson chiming in under the opinion headline of, "We're already seeing what a mistake Virginia's voters made." Basically, the lead sentence says it all here. Virginians are discovering, a bit late, unfortunately, that there's no such thing as Trumpism light. Yeah. That's not, it's not a thing. True. All right. Well, why don't we start with the fact side article, because then that way that will be interrupted. And I won't feel so bad about interrupting the flow of the fact reporting as I will in interrupting the flow of Eugene Robinson's opinionating. Youngkin urges calm on his call for a ban on mask mandates, but also Stokes division. Illustrated here by parents, one of whom looks, strikingly like a little older Marjorie Trader Greene, actually. It's kind of weird. But they're holding signs, "Let them breathe," And then another one holding the sign that says Mask Off Monday. By the way, my son's report from his local high school, I asked him about that. He said, I didn't see anybody doing that. It wasn't obvious to me. So there certainly weren't any people running around protesting and making a big deal out of it. Anyway, let's see. Oh, this is interesting. I'm looking at, we're not going to get to this, obviously, before the break. I'm looking at this woman's sign, the one who looks like Marjorie Trader Green. They are at Woodgrove High School, is what it looks like, the partially blocked sign. But, I can see OODGRO, Woodgrove High School. I do see the Loudoun County flag flying in the background, so where are they? Yep, Woodgrove High School, Purcellville, Virginia, for a mask protest yesterday. And they're identified here in case you care to know who they are. They didn't mind telling people. Jean Ballard, she's the one that actually looks a little like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Heather West, who doesn't. Anyway, Gregory Schneider and Laura Vozella covering it. We'll give you the lead sentence and cutout for our break. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin on Monday invoked the biblical call, what do you know, to love your neighbor, as school systems around the state struggled with strong reactions to his ban on local mask mandates. But the Republican also fanned the flames of partisan division in the face of court challenges and protests. Now, it's ironic that he's doing this outside. Thank God it's outside the high school, because if it was inside the high school and it was about partisan division, well, you could be fired. I should report him to the tip line. Can I do that? We'll give that a try as soon as they set that up. By the way, somebody had a great idea. I'm sure TikTok would love to get a hold of the tip line and fill that up appropriately. Anyway, that's an interesting way to start, right? The biblical call to love your neighbor. Love your neighbor by taking off your mask despite them asking you to please put your mask on because they're immunocompromised. I mean, talk about standing everything on its head. Well, all right. That, and of course, immediately taking to school grounds to teach a divisive topic like that. Should be ashamed of himself.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with the article that what do we read, like one sentence of, right? Youngkin urges calm for his call, on his call for a mask mandates, a ban on mask. I'm screwed this whole thing up. Anyway, Youngkin wants to get rid of the mask mandates, and is having a press conference outside of a school on a divisive topic, and it has brought out at least two protesters, one of whom looks a little bit like Marjorie Trader Green. By the way, she is holding a sign, as I said, that says, "Let them breathe." It's, a handmade sign, at least it's that, scrolled out in pen on a piece of poster board. She's holding it up in the morning sunlight, and you can see through it that she had written something else on the other side, and I kind of want to... I guess what the other side said was parents' rights, which is interesting because we were just talking about the weird confusion about who has these rights, children or parents. On one side it says parents' rights. On the other side it says let them breathe, which sounds like it's the right of the children she's actually concerned with. And everybody's concerned with the children. Anyway, It's breaking me up a little bit here. Anyway, she decided, though, for the picture, right? Oh, parents' rights. That seems a little selfish. Let me flip it over so that I can be photographed advocating for the children. So where were we? Right. Oh, Youngkin invoking the biblical call to love your neighbor by taking your mask off and not complying with your neighbor's wishes that you stay masked. And has this stupid press conference. School districts resisting his ban, quote, aren't recognizing the rights of parents today. And I'm sure that Jean then turned around her sign, the parents' rights side, and said, yeah. Youngkin told conservative radio host John Fredericks, and I don't know whether he was on the site with him at the big rally. By the way, once again, just pointing things out, the governor of Virginia, of course, the seat of government of Virginia is down in Richmond. And the governor, I guess, is supposed to live there. I don't know whether you have to live in the governor's mansion. He lives in Great Falls, Virginia, which, part of it, a small, tiny slice of it is technically, I think, in Loudoun County. But I think he lives in the Fairfax County portion of Great Falls. So his home isn't here in Loudoun County. His government isn't seated here in Loudoun County. It's just that he made great hay over other issues besides masking in Loudoun County and spent the whole campaign beating up on Loudoun County. And then, as I've mentioned to you innumerable times, lost Loudoun County overwhelmingly, but not as badly as he lost his own home county of Fairfax, by the way. But when it comes time to hold this protest, I guess, actually, you know what I'm thinking? I better keep reading because it's not entirely clear that these women who are holding the signs are holding the signs at a Youngkin press conference or anything like that. It's just that they are outside of this school, but it's not clear that he is also there. So maybe I've spoken too soon, but if he did, I just thought that was interesting that he would choose to have a rally like this or make a press conference in Loudoun County, to which he has no connection other than to say it is the county that I beat up on to ride to the governorship, and I'm going to keep beating up on them. And so I was just reminding everybody that for Loudoun County to decide to go along with the group of other Northern Virginia counties that are resisting the repeal of the mask mandates and going to court over it is kind of a brave thing. The school board members have been directly targeted, and as I mentioned the other day, there's at least one executive order entirely targeted at them and aiming at bringing down some sort of criminal punishment, perhaps, on the members of the Loudoun County School Board and administration who continue to defy him. At any rate, he's telling here a radio host, I don't know whether it's in the studio or at a rally or where the rally is, even if it is at a rally, telling him that they're not recognizing the rights of parents today, even though the parents voted overwhelmingly to reject him and probably would vote overwhelmingly to keep a mask mandate in place. But somehow they're not listening to parents. So I'm not surprised at all to hear these reactions from school boards that have consistently prioritized bureaucrats and politicians over the rights of parents. His comments dismissed the concerns of some of the biggest school systems in the state, a group of which have challenged Youngkin's ban before the Supreme Court of Virginia. Those localities include the counties of Fairfax and Prince William and the city of Richmond, argue that a state law requiring them to follow federal guidelines to fight the coronavirus makes it necessary to require face coverings in crowded schools. It doesn't even get to the constitutional issue. With feelings running high across Virginia, Youngkin asked parents for calm after a woman in Page County was arrested. We talked about her yesterday. Arrested and charged with making a threat against school officials there if they persisted in requiring masks. I don't know what the outcome of that vote was, by the way. And it doesn't say here either. But Youngkin, who took office promising to govern, quote, for all Virginians, has otherwise struck an increasingly partisan tone. No, you don't say. Public sentiment toward mask mandates is moving against the left liberals, he said Monday to Fredericks, who was Donald Trump's Virginia presidential campaign chair in 2016 and 2020, by the way, in case you didn't know who this radio host was. I certainly didn't. In the interview, Youngkin also touted a tip line for parents to report to the state any school officials they find to be behaving objectionably, including teaching divisive/divisive subjects. Youngkin has issued an executive order and is backing legislation that seeks to ban concepts such as critical race theory, an academic construct about the history of systemic racism. We're asking for folks, remember this, to send us reports and observations, help us be aware of their child being denied their rights that parents have in Virginia. And we're going to make sure we catalog it all, and it gives us further ability, in fact, to make sure we're rooting it out. Youngkin told Fredericks that 25 of Virginia's 130 school districts have challenged his ban on mask mandates. According to a Washington Post tally, though, 58 of the state's districts have either filed suit or pledged to keep a mask mandate in place. So that's a larger number. Let's see, 130, so 50, 65 would be half. Is that right? 50, half of 130, 15. Yeah, so 65 would be half. 58 is, pretty close, reasonably close to half the state's districts. And I am sure that they represent more than half of the state's students, as they are the most, among them are the most populous counties in the state. But anyway, Youngkin's office conceded that its figure of 25, based on news reports and not a survey of all districts, was probably low. So at least he did that, as opposed to being entirely Trumpy and saying, no, you're the one that's wrong. Youngkin urged parents who oppose masks to have patience while the legal battle plays out. What I'm telling parents today is trust the legal process. Love your neighbor. It's not the worst. He told Fredericks this nonsense. Anyway, this is one of the moments where I know people might want to do some things that make a strong statement. So this is his way of telling people that they're very special and we love them, but they need to go home and be peaceful. Don't punch people or rip their masks off on Monday and say, it's against the law to wear masks from now on. The governor says so. But he could just, come out and say it. But instead, be patient, trust the legal process, love your neighbor. One of those moments where I know people might want to do some things that make a strong statement. And he really could be saying, remember that even if we get rid of the mask mandate successfully, the mandate is gone. But if people want to wear masks, you need to respect their rights and their option to do so at this point and continue to respect it, because after all, this is a campaign to get them to respect your rights. You're going to have to respect their rights too. Well, they didn't respect my rights when they made me wear a mask, and everyone knows that two wrongs make a right. Yeah, people could be reminded that that's not actually true. Let's see. Delegate Skylar Van Valkenburg. Wowie, wow. A Democrat from the Richmond area. A school teacher in fact, Richmond area school district that is bucking the governor's mask optional order, said Youngkin was trying to have his cake and eat it too, and you know how that goes, by urging calm while still stoking opposition to masks. Principals are already teaching classes because so many teachers and staff are absent because they are sick, and now they can't do that because they're spending their entire day on phone calls dealing with conflicts that the governor initiated, Van Valkenburg said. That's a good point. In an interview Monday with conservative host Hugh Hewitt, because Youngkin is all about diversity in the interviews he gives. Youngkin said that he has been consulting with other Republican governors as he gets his administration underway. Hewitt mentioned Ron DeSantis of Florida. What a great model. And Mike DeWine of Ohio. And while Youngkin did not specifically confirm each, he said that it's been a great support network. And what we're seeing, of course, is states led by Republicans outperforming states who are led by Democrats. In what category? It's time to go. Sorry, we have to take a break. Okay, sure. So I don't know. For whatever reason, he wants to hide who he consults with, even though everyone knows. He's clearly saying, okay, yeah, I talked to Ron DeSantis and Mike DeWine. It was unclear what Youngkin meant by that comment, which came at the end of a discussion about mask mandates. If he was referring to masks, the data did not seem to back him up. Virginia, under Democratic Governor former governor, Ralph Northam, has performed well against both states in coronavirus case numbers and deaths. On Monday, the 7-day average of new cases in Virginia was 985. It was 1,424 in Florida, while Ohio's number was slightly lower at 960. Both Florida and Ohio have 7-day averages of deaths per 100,000, higher than Virginia's. Ohio had 13 per 100,000, Florida had 6.1, and Virginia had 2.2. Youngkin's office declined to make him available for a follow-up interview. Youngkin's recent position on masks takes a harder line than he did shortly before and after November's election, when he said he would leave it up to localities whether to impose mask mandates. But now that he's won, that's out the window. Some Trump supporters were unhappy with that position, not taking yes for an answer, including Fredericks, who now says he is pleasantly surprised by Youngkin's firmer stance. He's Trump in a red vest, Fredericks said, by the way. Remember, can I just stop here for a second? So this is the conservative host saying he's Trump in a red vest. And I don't even know if his vest was red. I can't remember. But anyway, it doesn't matter. He's Trump in a red vest. You'll recall, of course, during the election that if Democrats said, he's Trump in a red vest, the write-up in the papers was, here go the Democrats again trying to tie him to Trump. Oh, Trump, Trump, Trump. What do you have to say for yourself? What's your positive agenda? Stop tying Youngkin to Trump. He's not Trump. He's conservative, sure, but he's for the kids. He's for the children and the suburban moms, and he just wants parents to have rights. Stop saying he's Trump. Oh, he won? Hey, he's Trump, everybody. What do you know? But not the reporters. They're not the ones saying he's Trump. They're saying someone else is saying he's Trump. And we're not saying that they're idiots for saying it either. That's kind of weird and interesting. But that's what Fredericks said. Trump in a red vest. That he says in an interview with the Post after he had Youngkin on the air, referring to the governor's ever-present fleece vest while on the campaign trail. By the way, what's he hiding under that vest? Has he got circulation problems? Is that why he's constantly cold? Someone please tell me. Anyway, it's exceeded everybody's expectations. From the beginning of his campaign to the Saturday he put his hand on the Bible and took the oath of office. I was his biggest skeptic, says Fredericks. And now, 2 weeks into his administration, I'm his biggest supporter. Because something. Fredericks credits Youngkin's new stance to a post-election backlash from Trump voters who had turned out in record numbers in rural areas to give Youngkin his 2-point victory. He got blasted by the whole Trump ecosystem base, Fredericks said. If he wants to run for something else or keep his coalition together, you simply can't alienate us. So, it was not even by choice that he's become so Trumpy. He was simply forced to by events on the ground. It's very sad and beyond his control. Eugene Robinson has a bit to say on the same topic. Virginians are discovering a bit late, unfortunately, that there's no such thing as Trumpism light. He's just regular Trump, you see. When voters elected Republican Glenn Youngkin as governor, Winsome Earl Sears as lieutenant governor, and Jason S. Miyares, I don't even know how he pronounces his name, and he's the attorney general, many doubtless thought they were following a pattern that had served the state well. The year after one of our major parties wins the White House, they almost always put the other party in power in Richmond. Arguably, that worked to produce balance and moderation until Donald Trump transformed the GOP from a political party into a cult. Already, we're seeing what a mistake Virginia voters have made. This week, we learned that Miyares, I guess I'll have to learn how he pronounces his name and see if we're right or not, has fired the University of Virginia's counsel, Timothy Heaphy, maybe, Heaphy. I didn't learn how to pronounce his name yesterday. Supposedly because he does not share the new Attorney General's philosophy and legal approach. My strong suspicion is that Heaphy's firing has more to do with the fact that he is presently on leave from his university position, serving as chief investigative counsel for the House Select Committee, probing the January 6th Capitol insurrection. And by the way, it was easily solved within a comment from the Attorney General. He could have said, yes, I actually did fire him because of that, but not because I am angry about his political stance in investigating the January 6th insurrection, But I think that's great. I just don't think that the University of Virginia can function day to day with an attorney, a general counsel, who's on leave doing a very important job that demands all of his time in Washington, D.C. And we need another one. And you can't really be on leave from this job. You need to be here full time. And I gave him the choice, and he chose the committee, and I respect that, and we need another attorney. That would have actually been a great way to do it. But no, he has to be very Trumpy about it instead, I guess. I don't know. I haven't read any comments from the Attorney General about why he did it. Just these articles reporting it and people speculating as to why he did it. But, you know, the Attorney General can't get himself quoted in one of these articles. Anyway, to the Trump cult, January 6th, 2021... Robinson continues, was no more than what former Vice President Mike Pence has called one day in January. To the rest of us, and to future historians, maybe, it was an unprecedented violent assault on the citadel of our democracy and an attempt to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Surely, Virginia's chief law enforcement officers should praise a staff member. Counsels for the state's public colleges and universities are technically assistant attorneys general, apparently under our system here, who uses his time and expertise to learn the full truth of the events of January 6th. Republicans who previously held Miyares' post might have done so, but that was before the GOP lost its mind. Youngkin, who squeaked into office, don't forget that, with a 2-point margin of victory, campaigned as an unthreatening, fleece-wearing suburbanite who was the soul of moderation. Political analysts saw his refusal to break with Trump or forthrightly deny the former president's big lie about the stolen election as a mere tactic, not an indication of how he would behave as governor. But Youngkin's first week in office showed him to be a Trumpian culture warrior. He immediately issued an executive order banning the teaching of critical race theory or any inherently divisive concepts in Virginia schools. Because critical race theory is not actually being taught at K through 12 public schools in the Commonwealth, the order could only be an attempt to ban the accurate teaching of African American history, which necessarily covers slavery, Jim Crow repression, lynchings, massive resistance to school desegregation, systematic discrimination, and persistent disparities. If you teach black history without bringing up any divisive concepts, you're not teaching it at all. Youngkin also issued an order banning mask mandates in Virginia's public schools, although during the campaign he said whether to require masks in schools would be left to localities to decide. On Monday, 7 school boards filed suit in an attempt to block Youngkin's orders, saying that the governor is trying to usurp local control of the schools. Parents in Chesapeake have also sued to block the order. According to the Post, at least 58 of the roughly 130 school districts in the state say they'll continue requiring students to wear face coverings. Late last week, Youngkin issued a statement telling parents to, quote, listen to their principal and trust the legal process on the question of masks. Politically, he seems to want to have it both ways. But his lieutenant governor, Earl Sears, that is to say, Winsome Earl Sears, I guess she's adding the Earl back into her name, that's fine, offered more definitive words to the Trumpist base. Appearing on Fox News last week, she said Youngkin, quote, could withhold some state funding from school districts that defy his order and continue to require that students be masked. Another of Youngkin's early initiatives was to expand the duties of the state's chief diversity officer to include acting as an ambassador for unborn children. More diversity. Yes. Okay, I see. We include people who have been born and people who haven't. That's diversity. Thus ticking the right to life box on the list of culture war issues, and he pledges to seek tougher voter ID requirements in the name of election integrity, though he acknowledges there was no material fraud in 2020. The first days of Republican executive rule in Virginia should be a lesson for independent voters, like the ones who voted for President Biden, giving him a 10-point win in the state in 2020, then turned around and voted for Youngkin. Youngkin, Earl Sears, and Miyares might look like something new, fresh-faced and laudably diverse, but so far, at least, they act more like members in good standing within the cult of Trump. Someday, I hope, the Republican Party will escape the grip of a certain angry pensioner in Florida. Until then, don't be fooled and don't give them your votes. Well, I agree. Okay, but it's an opinion, you say. Let's see. Can we add one more roundup to our roundup? How about that? From Judd Legum's Popular Information newsletter, he shares some writing credit on this piece with Tesnim Zakaria and Rebecca Crosby. The title here, 2022, The Year of the Thought Police. And we mentioned earlier Ron DeSantis as a model for Youngkin. We mentioned it yesterday, too, when Greg brought it up. And his photo illustrates this piece here, which begins, for years, people on the right have complained about the supposed left-wing assault on free speech. We talk a lot on this show about the threat to free speech. It turns out it's very real. Tucker Carlson said on his Fox News program on December 18th, 2019. Carlson was upset because, on a previous show way back when, he had claimed that immigrants were making America, quote, poorer and dirtier. Many people, including those on the quote-unquote left, found his comments offensive and racist. As a result, some of Carlson's advertisers decided they would not like to be associated with his show any longer. Carlson said the, quote, American left will, quote, scream racist on Twitter until everyone gets intimidated. What he's describing is not an attack on free speech or on the First Amendment, but free speech itself. Carlson is free to go on his show and say that immigrants are making Americans dirtier. Others are free to criticize Carlson's remarks as racist or decide they don't want to do business with him any longer. Critical tweets and the free market don't threaten anyone's First Amendment rights. The First Amendment, which also applies to states, begins, Congress shall make no law, ellipses, abridging the freedom of speech. In other words, Carlson losing a few advertisers is not a threat to the First Amendment. No one tried to pass legislation prohibiting Carlson from being a bigot on the air. But the government passing laws restricting what thoughts or ideas people can express is a direct attack on constitutional rights. Today, Republican state legislators are proposing legislation to restrict what teachers can say in their classrooms. This trend started in 2021. 10 such bills have already become law, but has dramatically accelerated in the first few weeks of this year. A new report by PEN America, I don't know what PEN is, but they found that in the first 3 weeks of 2022, 71 bills have been introduced or pre-filed in state legislatures across the country to restrict the speech of teachers. That's right. Remember, meatpacking industry and securities need to be allowed to self-regulate. Teachers must wear body cams and be under 24/7 surveillance with a tip line to turn them in, lest they say something divisive to somebody or mention a topic that somebody else thinks is divisive. That should be enough. Or you just don't like them and you call up and say, they're teaching critical race theory, just to get at them. By the way, they've hidden the ball a little bit here. This is a weird construction, the way things are pointed out. Yeah, the trend did start in 2021. As soon as people started hearing about critical race theory, they started filing these bills to oppose it because the election was coming up. But there's been an increase in the number of bills being introduced because now state legislatures are back in session again following the elections. So they've had the opportunity to introduce those bills. It's not so much that there's been an explosion of interest as between then and now as an explosion of opportunity to capitalize on the explosion of interest that began in 2021. So anyway, they continue here. These bills were put together hastily, and it shows. You know where he's going with this one. In Virginia, a Republican legislator introduced a bill requiring schools to ensure students understand, quote, the first debate between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Lincoln actually debated Stephen Douglas, a very different person. Other bills contain contradictory language or leave important terms undefined. Nevertheless, 55% include some kind of mandatory punishment for violators. Although I will say they've been listening to the show, they've realized that the time is long past for when you can introduce legislation and just say the embarrassment of being caught out violating statute will be enough of a enforcement mechanism for us in the 1960s era liberal vein. But Republicans know they need to put punishment clauses in their legislation in order to give them teeth. Can't blame them for that, even though we don't like the areas in which they're legislating. All right, let's see. Moving on. This is about putting the fear of God into teachers and administrators. Jeffrey Sachs, the author of the PEN America report, told columnist Greg Sargent, teachers are going to avoid discussing certain topics altogether, topics related to race, sex, and American history that as a society we might want to discuss. In fact, there was a story yesterday, maybe it was from down in Florida, Texas, someplace crazy, or was it someplace normal? I can't remember. Where a professor who was scheduled to give a speech on such topics to teachers, continuing teacher education, not even to the kids, ended up canceling the lecture for fear that it might be adjudged to have violated this new law, even if it's not in place yet, wherever it was. I'll have to dig that story up. Although I guess making a note to myself at this point, probably, we'll see whether it works. But let's see. I put in my note, speech canceled. And circle that and see if I can come back to that and find that for you. You've probably seen the story on Twitter yesterday. A particularly aggressive government effort to limit speech is underway in Florida. Oh, good. Maybe this will save me from having to research it. Led by Governor Ron DeSantis, of course. A bill championed by DeSantis prohibits any school or private business from engaging in instruction or training that makes anyone, quote, feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of their race. How are you going to prove that? If you can't prove Trump's state of mind during the insurrection, I don't know if you can adequately prove whatever the hell it is they're looking for in this statute. All right, let's see. Critics say the focus on white guilt precludes any candid discussion of American history. This isn't even a ban on critical race theory. This is a ban on black history. State Senator Chevron Jones, a Democrat, said. They are talking about not wanting white people to feel uncomfortable. Let's talk about being uncomfortable. My ancestors were uncomfortable when they were stripped away from their children. Well, sure. I only wish that would have some impact with these uncomfortable white people. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue reading this entry from Judd Legum's Popular Information, rounding up the year of suppression of free speech that's going on here. Right, of course, we were right in the middle of State Senator Chevron Jones's objection to the Florida law, saying, they were talking about not wanting white people to feel uncomfortable. Let's talk about being uncomfortable. My ancestors were uncomfortable when they were stripped away from their children. To wit, the bill explicitly requires teachers to lie to students. It requires teachers to define American history as the creation of a new nation based largely on the universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. At America's founding, of course, the principles stated in the Declaration of Independence were not universal. Black people, women, and other groups had few rights. The Florida bill is a radical attack on free speech in schools and the private sector, but that hasn't stopped it from moving rapidly through the Republican-controlled legislature. Last week, just 7 days after the bill was filed, it was approved by the Senate Education Committee. Dozens of similar bills are on the march in state legislatures across the nation. Missouri currently has 19 bills seeking to restrict the speech of teachers and school administrators, the most of any state, according to PEN America's Educational Gag Order Index. PEN or PEN, I don't know how they say it aloud. So far, the bills that have gained the most traction are HB 1474 and 1995, two bills that call for the creation of a Parents' Bill of Rights. In HB 1474, sponsored by Representative Nick Schroer, S-C-H-R-O-E-R, it prohibits any curriculum implementing critical race theory. The bill misleadingly defines critical race theory as anything that, quote, identifies, ellipsis, groups of people, entities, or institutions in the United States as inherently, immutably, or systemically sexist, racist, biased, privileged, or oppressed. This definition is incorrect and illustrates how sloppily some of these types of bills are often written. As PEN America points out, this feature is becoming increasingly common to 2022's bills, and that's probably because they're passing them around and copying them off one another, a la ALEC. Schroer's bill also bans the use of the 1619 Project, the Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice curriculum, and other equity-focused programs. Notably, of the 19 bills introduced, at least 5 explicitly prohibit teaching the 1619 Project, a history of the nation which was produced by the New York Times and won a Pulitzer Prize. HB 1995 takes it a step further. Under that bill, parents can request a 2-week notice whenever a teacher plans to discuss a divisive or controversial topic that may conflict with a parent's belief that all persons, regardless of race, ethnicity, color, national origin, or ancestry, should be treated equally. I'm sure that's their belief. Parents will also have the ability to sue schools and can be awarded up to $5,000 if they win. Additionally, schools found in violation of the bill will be forced to pay a fine. 80% of this fine will go towards a fund that provides tuition assistance for students to attend private schools. Not unlike the bill here in Virginia, focusing on a way to siphon off funding for people to use to go to private school. Other bills have been introduced in Missouri's state legislature include one that requires teachers to, quote, promote an overall positive, unquote, history of the United States, and one that prohibits teachers from advocating for or compelling students to adopt or affirm certain ideas related to race, sex, and related categories. Another bill targets higher education and was introduced by a lawmaker who told Politico his priority this legislative session is to, quote, shut down critical race theory in Missouri. Everybody's highest priority, I'm sure. Yeah, looking back, just sort of looking back at that second one, the one that prohibits teachers from advocating for or compelling students to adopt or affirm certain ideas. Okay. Anyway, let's see, continue on here. Legislators in Arizona propose amending state constitution to ban CRT. It's risen to a constitutional level already. That's pretty quick for something they can't define. 3 bills have been introduced in Arizona this year that would ban various discussions of race in schools. One of the bills, HCR 2001, otherwise known as the Stop Critical Race Theory and Racial Discrimination in Schools and Other Public Institutions Act, would amend the Constitution of Arizona to prohibit teachers and other school employees, don't let the janitors do it, from compelling or requiring any employee or student to adopt, affirm, endorse, adhere to, or profess to certain ideas about race. You can't profess that, kids. Stop doing it. The bill specifically bans instruction that could make students, quote, feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of the individual's race, ethnicity, or sex. The purpose of the bill states that slavery, legal racial discrimination, and racism are inconsistent with the founding principles of the United States, despite the fact that all 3 were written into the Constitution as enacted by the founders. The bill states that racially discriminatory ideologies and practices, such as that known as critical race theory, directly contradict the principles of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the United States Constitution. What do you know? The 14th Amendment, however, requires equal treatment under the law. It doesn't ban ideologies or prohibit people from discussing racism and its root causes. Another bill introduced in Arizona, HB 2112, for you Rush fans out there, prohibits teachers from engaging in any instruction that presents any form of blame or judgment on the basis of race, ethnicity, or sex. It's unclear what specific kind of instruction would violate the prohibition. Of course, most of these things are aimed at saying that slavery was a white institution used against blacks to keep them in bondage and involuntary servitude. Oh, but I feel bad about that because I'm white. Well, that's really that's really more of a you problem than a me problem. You have a psychological issue with this. And, you need to take it up with the therapist, not fire the teacher. Anyway, nevertheless, teachers who violate the ban would be subject to disciplinary action, including the suspension or revocation of the teacher's certificate, as the state board deems appropriate. Violations would also allow the state attorney general to initiate a suit in the Superior Court, along with a civil penalty not to exceed $5,000 per school district, charter school, or state agency where the violation occurs. It's quite a roundup, and it only samples from a few states. So, you get a real flavor for what's going on there. And, there's worse in other places, if you can believe it. One of them's Idaho, if you can believe that. I have something here from Politico that maybe would make a good setup. I don't know. Maybe I'll read it now, because I don't know that Jonah's really going to want to spend, well, she might not want to spend any time on it whatsoever. It might just be annoying and embarrassing or whatever, but she may want to touch on it, but probably not want to give you the whole full background. But I could take care of that. And then we can leave the segment free for discussion of all of the rest of the fun things that she would like to bring to our attention. What about it? Well, at least we'll read a little bit of it here. Why not? And I'll add that there's even more going on in Idaho than what Politico rounds up. Here's another thing, by the way, just by way of transition between the topics of the schools and COVID and the schools and CRT and expansion of, Trump cultism syndrome throughout the states. One more segue piece here. I just happened to see being tweeted around, I guess, Melissa Davlin, who is identified here on Twitter as host and lead producer of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television, which is Idaho PTV. I guess it's a public television. I haven't clicked through to see if that's the case, but PTV makes me think that's what it's about. But when you're reading it all as one word here and you're not entirely sure what you're doing on the fly here, and you're like, Idaho TV. Oh, Idaho PTV. Yes, okay. Melissa Davlin commenting on the tweet of Katya Stepovich, who I guess is likewise a Idaho based television reporter. So breaking news that Katya reports here is that West Ada schools, ADA, that's the county, right? That's isn't that Joan? Is that your county where Boise is? Just passed. Is that right? I don't know. I didn't check that. I'm not familiar with all the counties in Idaho. Well, just check that out, by the way. But I do think it was mentioned in the story that it was one of the larger school districts in the state. Is that right? Ada County is located in the southwestern part of Idaho. Yeah, okay. And the county seat and largest city is Boise. Yeah, all right. We remembered it correctly. Whether we pronounced it correctly is another story, and Joan can tell us about that. But Katya reports that the West Ada schools just passed a motion 3-2 to remove their COVID-19 exposure emails to parents. It's not a mask thing. It's even worse. So parents will not be informed when a kid in their child's class tests positive. Melissa commenting on top of that, the largest school district in the state will no longer inform parents and guardians of COVID-19 exposure in their kids' classrooms. The same day that IDHW, what are we talking about? Idaho. All right. Well, we'll figure out what that is. IDHW declared health workers, maybe, or hospital workers, the system, I suppose, IDHW, declared crisis standards of care for Ada and 17 other counties. So in other words, they're experiencing a huge spike in coronavirus cases. I guess maybe the Omicron wave finally making its way there. spiking the situations in Ada and 17 other counties. And forget the mask thing. Now they're not even going to tell you anymore whether there was COVID in your kid's classroom. By the way, do you remember like about 15 seconds ago when the Republican demand was for transparency in the classroom, that teachers, lest they mention the words critical race theory at some point during the year or say anything about race at all or tell you what color slaves, generally speaking, were, can't have that. And you have to wear a body cam, and we need surveillance cameras inside the room to make sure that you don't, plus the right to be able to, one, personally report you to the authorities if our kids say that you said anything divisive in your teaching, and two, we need to see your lesson plans ahead of time, and three, we should be able to sue the school system and recover cash, plus get you fired and added to a do not hire list throughout the state. All of that's true, but we aren't any longer going to recognize your right to find out if there was actual COVID in your kid's classroom. We're not going to notify you anymore. So that way you can't possibly check or test yourself or isolate or close the school by worrying about coronavirus. You're just going to have to sit there until you either collapse or die from it or whatever. That'll be your first notice. That's your transparency. You just sit there and wait to get sick. And if you do, you do. And by the way, you better come to school anyway. And if you don't, you don't. Well, I guess that's the sort of thing that you might expect to see happen in a place that's as weird and wrapped up in its own internal fights among Republicans as Idaho actually is. This is an interesting premise for an article here from Politico. Why there's a civil war in Idaho inside the GOP. Now, that serves dual purposes here. One, it tells you where you're looking, and two, it reminds you that the civil war that's going on here is, in fact, inside the GOP. If you look at the picture of, I don't know, some event somewhere, they're all, pretty much looking the same here with Trump flags and guys hanging out with their AR-15s on slings, wearing tactical gear because you never know when you need to blend in to a crowd of suburban women who look like trees, I guess. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, here they are with their guns, looking sternly at the camera and, illustrating this fun piece in Politico. Eric Siciliano, I'm going to give that pronunciation to it. Siciliano. I guess he's, I don't know, is that Scigliano. Reporting Dateline here from Star, Idaho, which I guess is up north, I think, if I recall the reporting correctly. The Republican primary for governor was still months away, but the packed City Hall chambers of this Oregon Trail town 18 miles west of Boise. Oh, okay. Later on, they must mention the northern part of town. So this is 18 miles west of Boise, not that far away, and down south instead. I forget what mention there was. I skimmed this story last night. Something kicks back up to the north later on. 6 candidates, 2 each for governor, lieutenant governor, and secretary of state, had accepted the invitation from the County Republican Women's Club to make their case to the 75 or so citizens who filled the folding chairs and stood at the back. Cowboy hats outnumbered face masks. Fun event and stat. The stakes in Idaho's primary, it's its own right, state in its own right. Come on, learn the pronunciation. The stakes in Idaho's primary next May are high. Many of the people there are probably high as well. If it's anything like every other statewide primary in nearly 2 decades, the Republican ballot will effectively decide the general election here in what the previous governor, Butch Otter, dubbed the reddest of the red states. The candidates sitting at the mics tussled over traditional Republican issues in some predictable ways, but they also spoke of dire challenges that might seem out of place in rural Idaho. We're losing our freedom, to foreign governments and foreign corporations, said one dark horse gubernatorial contender, a cowboy-hatted county commissioner from the state's remote northern, there we are, panhandle. That's what I must have been thinking of. As evidence, he cited the $1.4 billion in pandemic assistance that Idaho had received from that, quote, foreign power, the U.S. government, as part of the CARES Act. That's an interesting way of looking at it. Another first-time candidate for governor urged a moratorium on resettling Afghan refugees in Idaho because, quote, it's the United Nations that's driving refugee settlement, not the United States. I don't know how many they're getting, but it can't be all of them, basically. Anyway, that's upsetting to them, apparently. As the forum progressed, the candidates directed their resentment and scorn not just at Democratic adversaries, or adversaries if you prefer, but at threats within the party. In particular, what? Everything shifted because a pop-up ad. Another one of these things. Politico does this, remember? In particular, at their threats within the party, right? Aiming resentment and scorn at the sitting Republican governor, Brad Little. Although Republicans dominate the state, these party stalwarts, sounded strangely embattled and uneasy. All right, back on track here. The fault lines became evident soon. A former ER nurse named Mary Souza from the northern, there we are again, city of Coeur d'Alene, who was running for Secretary of State, inveighed against a threat that might seem nearly as distant as the United Nations, election fraud, of course. I see what they mean distant, but they all think it's lurking right around every corner, of course. Then President Donald Trump won almost 64% of Idaho's votes in 2020, 5 points more than in 2016, and took all but 3 small counties. Nevertheless, Souza called election integrity, whatever that might be, the greatest challenge facing the state. She and many other Idahoans believe, or seem to believe, that Trump should have won more. Raise your hand if you think the last election was fair and clean, she called out. Only 5 or 6 hands rose. But at least some did. Anyway, Chad Hoke, H-O-U-C-K. We'll see what he's Hoke. Her opponent and the current Secretary's chief deputy tried to set the record straight on the last election. He recounted how his office had hand-counted ballots for 3 counties and found vanishingly small discrepancies. Just 1 vote in one of the counties. That's pretty vanishingly small. That's next to 0. That's as close as you can get to 0 without being 0. The real problem facing the GOP in Idaho, said Hoke, is divisiveness. Well, he may have said divisiveness. Let's fight about that. Hoke quit the race a few weeks later, by the way, opening up space for another mainstream candidate, but he delivered a warning in Star that still echoes in the March to the May primary. The Idaho Republican Party is injured and kicking itself while it's down. We've got a lot to do if we want to pull the Republican Party together and keep Idaho from shifting into purple and blue, as other states have, he said. Really? I hope you don't succeed in that. That threat that ruby red Idaho could somehow turn purple may not be as far-fetched as it sounds. Remember, Joan is there. She could convince a lot of people. As recently as the mid-1990s, Democrats were still competitive in Idaho, even as many other western states, including Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico, were more strongly Republican. Well, those 3 are now blue spots on the electoral map. That's an interesting point. I guess it's true. Tom Luna, Idaho's affable state Republican chair, notes 2 key similarities between those then-red states and today's Idaho. Each was a fast-growing state where Republicans were fighting with each other. Well, then keep it up, guys. Fast growth driven by in-migration is certainly at play in Idaho, one of the fastest-growing states in the country, according to census data. I didn't realize that. But so is intra-party fighting, as anti-government militants and self-proclaimed ideologically inflamed political refugees from the left coast collide with long dominant traditional conservatives and an ambitious lieutenant governor with a zest for pushing culture war buttons tries to unseat a pragmatic governor struggling to bridge the gap. We all heard about these two and their fights. Together, the growth and the fighting suggests the GOP in Idaho is both dominant and fragile. There's a civil war in the Idaho Republican Party, said Idaho Democratic Party Chair Fred Cornforth, who recently resigned due to a cancer diagnosis. There are really 3 or 4 parties under the uneasy Republican umbrella, he explained. There are the populists, the ones making the most noise, and the libertarians, moderates who've shifted right of center, meaning they aren't really moderates anymore, and Republicans who don't recognize their party anymore and will drift over to voting Dem. We're now at this point, see the story illustrated with a photo of Republican protesters gathered outside the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise ahead of Joe Biden's arrival last September, holding Trump flags and a sign that says, "Forced vaccines are medical rape," illustrated with a swastika formed from syringes. And then it says, "Joe Biden, we do not consent." So, level-headed dissent going on here. Chuck Malloy, a veteran Republican advisor turned columnist, streamlines that list. That is the 4 or 5 different Republican parties that Fred described here. I've been saying for a long time that Idaho is a 2-party state. I didn't even go with Iowa. I said Ohio. What a strange thing. It's the H-O at the end, I suppose. I've been saying for a long time that Idaho is a 2-party state, he told me. The Republican Party and the more Republican Party. Republican Chair Luna dismisses the term civil war, but acknowledges that after more than 2 decades of Republican dominance, dissatisfaction is rising within the ranks. This will be a primary like we've never seen in Idaho, he said. A little Trumpy there. Like we've never seen before. 2 of the heaviest hitters in the Republican primary races, Governor Little and estranged Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan. I learned later on in here that it's pronounced McGeehan. It's spelled McGeechan, but it's pronounced apparently McGeehan, who's challenging him for the top job, weren't at the state forum in Star. Little hasn't yet declared his candidacy for re-election, though he's raking in campaign contributions, and McGeehan's spokesperson told me she was traveling around the state. Nor was the other nationally prominent figure in the governor's race, Ammon Bundy, the sagebrush rebel and serial occupier of government facilities. That's because he's not a registered Republican, or at least wasn't when the invitations were issued, a host told me, and he still isn't. In a way, Idaho's 2022 election season began in January of 2019, soon after newly elected Governor Little and Lieutenant Governor McGeehan took office, when she launched what would become a campaign to upstage and undermine Little each time he left the state. Remember this? And here's the note here. McGeehan, pronounced McGeehan, started by posting a photo of herself posing in front of the state capitol with 2 members of the 3 Percenters, the militia movement named for, everything moved now. The militia movement named for the debunked claim that just 3% of colonists fought in the American Revolution. She even swore several of them into the ranks and followed up by appearing with members of the John Birch Society and other far-right groups. In the spring of 2020, when the novel coronavirus that she said may or may not be a pandemic hit, McGeehan loudly opposed Little's emergency stay-home and business closure orders. She blasted federal economic relief measures, but accepted forgivable paycheck protection loans for the transmission shops she and her husband own in Idaho Falls. In May of 2021, days after announcing her run for governor, McGeehan escalated. When Little left the state, remember this, she issued a sweeping executive order banning mask requirements, which he promptly rescinded on his return. When he left overnight in early October to join other governors on a photo op tour of the Mexican border, McGeehan issued a new order banning mandatory vaccination and COVID testing and asked the Idaho National Guard about deploying troops to the border that Little was touring. When he left again in early November to attend a gala at Mar-a-Lago, Little did not even inform McGeehan. I was wondering when he was going to stop telling her that he was doing things like that. Seems like a dumb idea. Disputes between governors and their understudies aren't unheard of. In most states, including Idaho, governors and lieutenant governors run separately and can be from different parties. But Little and McGeehan, whom he supported in the 2018 primary, are both Republicans. So is everyone elected statewide post-2002, when a lonely Democrat won a single term as superintendent of public instruction. Republicans occupy 86 out of 105 legislative seats and compose the state's entire congressional delegation. You can learn more about Idaho, of course, next, as Joan comes in and expresses embarrassment. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you.
You probably know Idaho is like the fastest growing state in the country.
Just learned that.
It's not blue people moving here.
Oh, well, that's too bad. All right, well, we are back, and everybody knows that, and I don't think I have to tell everybody what they're listening to. They're here for a reason, but now the reason is you and not me. And Joan McCarter joins us. She actually could tell us a lot more, I'm sure, about Idaho. Certainly more than Politico could tell us about Idaho. But I thought it was an interesting reminder of what's going on there, and but I think we can probably set the record straight. I guess it's the job of the Republican chair there to worry about the state of the party and not to worry about the Republican infighting, not publicly, but rather to say, well, my worry is that the state could turn blue because there are other Western states that were solidly red and became very fast-growing states, and then with a lot of Republican infighting became blue states, or at least have trended blue lately. And Idaho, as it turns out, yes, is among the fastest-growing states, and there's political infighting among Republicans, but you're saying it's growing, but it's growing with other Republicans? Is that what's happening? Okay.
The difference between Idaho and the rest of the states that are purpling or have large population increase is that for, 2 decades, the population increase has been purposefully from extremely conservative Orange County type Republicans. That's what it started with, California, Southern Californians.
That's what
coming here specifically to turn communities and then the state crazy.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, that could be
it kind of started when I'm confusing I'm thinking Mark Furman. But that was the
type of
George Floyd cop, right?
The
LAPD, the cop back with the Rodney King
Furman,
case.
yeah, Rodney King, yeah.
He moved up to northern Idaho, beautiful place, to Coeur d'Alene, because we had Aryan Nation activity there for a long time, fought them, got them out, broke them financially. But then they decided this was a good place to sort of take refuge. The LAPD white supremacist types.
Huh. That's odd.
And that sort of grew. And a solid core of white flight, extremely politically active people decided, we could remake this part of Idaho and make it ours. And they've just been metastasizing since then. So truly, there is a very political sense among the people that are moving to Idaho that this is a place where they can be their worst selves. That this is the place where they'll be free of government mandates. That this is the place where they can amass all of the guns that they want.
Yeah.
And it's largely white flight.
Not
entirely, particularly in the Boise area, because we have quite a few international corporations, and the city of Boise itself is relatively sane. But for the rest of the state, it's not good. Politico sort of skated over the top of something that's been happening for a really long time. And
that's what they do. That's Politico, or newspapers in general for you. It's an interesting trend there. I mean, I recall hearing off and on about what's going on, at least up in the northern part of the state, and the people who have moved through there, and the various names that have risen to prominence there, and either started or in some cases ended political careers there. But it's interesting that the ultra conservatives are the ones doing it. I've heard a few people over the years mentioning, some of these lower population western states, Wyoming, the Dakotas, to some extent Montana, they're a little higher in population there. But I've certainly heard people say, well, there are a couple of blue pockets there. There are places that people fly in for ski resorts or what have you.
Well, and that's Idaho. We have Blaine County. Yeah. One of the first cities, in fact, or populated areas in the country to have a huge COVID explosion back at the very beginning.
Right. Yes, that's right.
Because people were escaping it and taking it to them, this poor little community of resort workers who can barely afford to live. Yeah.
There's certainly pockets around, but I've heard people talking in the past about, if there really was a concerted effort to do something like this on behalf of Democrats, if Democratic-leaning, liberal-leaning people just migrated, not even that massive of migration, but you could plant yourself in some of these western states, and with the movement of 200,000 people, which is a lot of people, but I mean, not for if you're moving from out of, say, the giant blue cities of the coasts, right? And moving them there, you could actually possibly turn a state like Wyoming blue and grab 2 Senate seats while you're at it. I mean, it would be a massive undertaking. And we think, you can't really engineer that kind of mass movement. Although it turns out you can engineer it. You got to be a Republican to do it.
Idaho has always been on the kooky end.
It's there again.
Traditionally.
Yeah.
So
at least
we were there ready to turn. Montana, not nearly as kooky. Smaller population in Montana, too, than in Idaho. Wyoming also has a much smaller population.
Yes. I mean, tiny in Wyoming. It's crazy. But they do have the 2 senators.
They have the 2 senators. And, Idaho.
Yeah. Well, okay. I say stay there and fight. So, anyway, I just thought it was
easy
interesting
for you to say.
Yeah, I know, right? You take care of that for me, would you? Thank you. I'll be here. I got my own fight.
For the Boise Independent School District, it has, because it is the independent school district, if I recall correctly, it predates statehood.
Oh, okay.
because we had Boise before the state was a state. So anyway,
Sure.
my little blue island stays a little blue island. The independent school district of Boise can do things like mask mandates and informing parents when children are exposed and things like that.
That's a nice note.
The suburbs that are the problem here with that. Ada County, West Ada.
Yes.
County.
That's where they mentioned. That's the school district that just decided, why don't we just stop telling parents when kids in their children's classes get COVID? We'll just not tell them because something transparency. We need to know all the books you're reading, and we need you to wear a body cam in case you say something about race.
On the one hand, it's because it is West Ada.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of kooks in West Ada. It's not just northern Idaho now. They've also been moving in to the suburbs here. You can just assume that there are positive cases
I guess
of COVID in the school. It's
Maybe
a given now. So I think that's probably the attitude of, why bother? Because everybody knows, they still have to inform parents if kids have head lice.
That's serious. Right. But what if the lice have COVID? You don't tell.
Right. So I can
tough.
see that attitude. Well, we're all going to get it anyway. So why bother?
I guess that's an alternative explanation. We'll just, how about we print one laminated letter and just pass it around? It's
almost at that point.
Okay. Well, that explains part of it.
But that we're going back to crisis standards of care. We were out of it for all of, started back in September. The entire state was under it. Mm-hmm. And I think we've had maybe a 5-week, 6-week lifting of it, and now it's back again.
Well, that's one of those things with those pandemics. You just, you're on the downslope of a spike and just say, that's it. There'll never be another spike. This is the 5th spike, but there'll totally never be a 6th. Masks off, everybody. Oh, all right, a new variant. Now we're back in again. And I'm sure they'll do it on the downslope with this one, too.
Except in Idaho, it wasn't masks off because
right.
Who's wearing masks? I had to go to the store last night, and I don't know, maybe a quarter of people were in masks.
Well, that sounds like a lot, probably, for your state, anyway. People, the quarter that wear it are in your corner of the state.
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, we got problems. But, anyway, I just thought we would focus on your problems in particular today.
Thank you.
It's
Congress is out. So,
there's nothing else to do, right?
The perennial problem of Joe Manchin is receded a tiny bit.
Right. He's not dominating the headlines. He's home.
Although I see
some other ones.
Thanks to Politico, a big debate happening on Twitter whether Chuck Schumer pushed too hard and should have known what Manchin was doing, and all of the supposed moderate senators are mad that Schumer forced them to do these votes and didn't something Schumer, as if these votes were, defund the police or...
Yeah, I mean, everybody said what they were going to do with the vote and declared themselves ahead of time, and a significant portion of the caucus said, we know what the vote count is, but we know we have to take this vote. And there wasn't very much dissent, although I guess that dissent, if they stayed quiet, now they feel like they have to speak up and say, why did they make us do this? All right. Well,
I mean, as if... I think that their ire should be directed to Joe Manchin, personally, and to Kirsten Sinema.
Yeah. They could have made this go away by changing their vote, and then, the problem solved, and then if they still want to focus, it wouldn't take them out of the headlines.
And maybe Democrats could stay in the majority after this November.
Sure.
Maybe.
It might have been a thought, but I guess so. So I guess they're mad at having to have taken the vote and not getting into the benefit of it, but that's a
I don't know how
strategic
much
decision.
of it's true, how much of it's Politico being Politico, how much of it is maybe some disgruntled senior aide
could be
bitching
right.
about it.
Yeah, I might have to find a new job if my boss loses, so that makes me angry. Yeah, okay, well, all right, they can complain about that, I suppose. But yeah, nothing changes, and we're still stuck with the filibuster. We knew that what the vote count was going to be, and it came out just like everybody thought. So there's that. We weren't wrong about that, but what are they out for a couple of? This is an extensive recess
No,
or
just
short?
this week.
Okay, all right,
Just this week. Because they still do have to come back and figure out how we don't shut down government on February 18th.
Yeah, that's like less than. Well, it will be 3 weeks away when they return. I guess just under 3 weeks. Good reason, and by the way, all talk of pushing for some sort of talking filibuster, whether demonstrative or realistic or what, I don't know, for the voting rights bill has evaporated. It was the vote and everybody go away. Are they? Is that the end of it for now? Is it something they think they'll bring back?
I think that they're probably still working on it. I know for his part, Merkley is still trying to figure out a way to make it happen, and making the case again in Politico. Mm-hmm. But this is an okay story.
Yeah.
That the fear that McConnell is going to exploit it is overblown.
Okay.
Because the one thing they care about, tax cuts, judges, they don't have to really push any kind of policy thing because they have the Supreme Court to do it now.
Right.
The only thing Mitch McConnell wants to do, and most Republicans want to do, is get radical nominees into seats and cut taxes. They don't have a lot in terms of policy, and a lot of the stuff that they have policy is fairly small bore and can be done in a bipartisan way. So Berkeley's working hard to try to say, this fear is overblown. That's Sinema's supposed opposition to it. Because that, is just not how they roll. They don't particularly care that much about policy stuff. And they've got the courts to do all of the radical stuff anyway.
Yeah. All right. So they're not.
So he's I think going to continue to work on it. I think that it is futile.
Oh, yeah,
with the two of those. Manchin seems likelier to me that Manchin comes around the Sinema at this point. But what do I know?
For that specifically, although he's been, I've to put it kindly, of two different minds. It seems even on the talking filibuster specifically. I've heard him say yes. I've heard him say no.
Yeah, he said that's a great idea. Make them work. Make them talk. Don't let them do that. So Manchin. Okay. What you can say about Manchin is that either he's dumb and doesn't remember day to day what he says and what he promises, or he's extremely canny and is just really good at stringing people along.
Neither position is great.
Whichever way, what he has done is string people along, both on filibuster, on voting rights. Because, again, what they were voting on, what they were trying to get the filibuster broken on, was the Freedom to Vote Act, which is the one he wrote with the help of other senators when he rejected the For the People Act. This was Joe Manchin's bill.
Yeah. But he can't be bothered. Not
I don't know what goes on in that brain of his. But I do know that he has been very effective at stringing Biden and Schumer and all of the other Democrats along. He's been in every meeting. They talk to him all of the time. They didn't come up with these strategies, the idea that they could separate the bipartisan infrastructure bill from Build Back Better, because they were close to getting him. They didn't pull that out of thin air. They really truly thought that they had Manchin at least ready to make a deal. And boom, he's not. It's off the table. So I have no idea what motivates him. I have no idea what's going on with him, but I don't blame it on Biden and Schumer for thinking that he was working with them, because he gave every appearance of doing so.
Yeah. Are we working together? Yes, we are. All right, then. what a fool. I can't believe you think you're working with him. Although that does, I guess sometimes that criticism comes from the left too, where we say, why do you think you're working with him?
Yeah.
That's actually a good question.
Clearly you can't trust this guy.
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah, I don't know what to make of him either. And it seems like if anything happened as between him and Cinema, is almost like he started reading the profiles of Cinema and people saying, we can't figure her out. She's such a mystery. And he said, that's cool. I should do that.
The better explanation I saw from somebody else is that he's sort of like Trump in that he changes his mind based on the last person he talked to.
That could be.
And that, they will be making progress in meetings with other senators, and he will be being convinced, and he will be making all of the good noises. And then he goes home and he gets a call from a buddy, from ExxonMobil or something.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know who his buddies are.
And they sway him. They change his mind. And I think that's probably the likeliest explanation. I think he's...
That could be.
That and ego.
Yeah. Well, that's operative in all of them, I guess.
Yes.
But, yeah, I mean, I don't know what other... It's as good a guess as any. We don't know who's calling him or who's weighing on him. But, yeah, I mean, it's either that or one of the worst explanations of he has no idea whatsoever what's going on and just says things, whatever he can use to escape the reporter who's asking the questions.
I think that's part of it, too.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has that as a tactic, but just the idea of him coming out of a conference with other senators and saying, we've reached, we're getting close to an agreement on this. I believe in this, and I hope they can get to it. And then asking him the next day, so about that thing that you were hoping you could get to. Oh, that? No. That was stupid. What a dumb thing. How does that happen? Right? It's either that you're right, either that he's being convinced by somebody else away from the cameras, or he's forgetting from day to day where he is and what he said. And I imagine that's worse.
That is possible as well.
Sure. We have, like I said, we have such senators as it is.
And also at his core, he's very Republican in his attitudes about who is deserving.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
The whole back to the child tax credit thing, and those people are probably just using the money on drugs anyway.
Yeah, that is fairly Republican. I don't know, and it's very 80s.
It's very 80s.
So he's a little Trumpy in that sense, yeah, right? He's whatever it takes to get away from the reporters, and whoever speaks to him last, and he's living in the 80s, which I don't know. I mean, I don't think they were particularly glorious time for Joe Manchin, but what do I know about his personal life? Maybe that's the case. It's very weird, but yeah, I mean, even the people who are moderate Democrats and conservative Democrats who are sort of stuck in that mode of thinking, it's not that much of a throwback to welfare queens and spending all your money on drugs. Jeez, they've, I think, evolved.
Which, is now just pure dog whistle.
Yeah. Well, right. So okay. No telling what's going on in his head. No change there, I suppose, except for the fact that, okay, now they've had their vote. They're on recess. They say they're working again at trying to build back better, maybe in pieces, but I don't see that that's any easier.
No, because they still have to do it by budget reconciliation.
Yeah.
And, okay, so do they come back with the next budget instructions and specifically allow for 2 more budget reconciliation bills? They're still operating on Build Back Better under 1, so do they come back with a second one to say, okay, we can pick up other pieces? I don't know that anybody knows for sure how they're going to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems,
and I'm also not sure. There might be some effort to look at the omnibus spending bill that has to happen if it's not going to be another continuing resolution, and I'm not holding my breath that they actually get the omnibus done.
right.
And we don't have a continuing resolution on February 18th. But is there any way they can move some parts of this into the omnibus bill? That's, I think, one thing that they're looking at. They're also potentially looking at some more COVID relief for businesses in the omnibus.
Okay. That
So,
might be helpful.
once again, you have the must-pass bill. Get what you can out of it.
Yeah. Although,
Except for Republicans, it's not must-pass. They know they can get another continuing resolution out of it, and they want to get another continuing resolution out of it because that means Biden is still operating under the last Trump budget.
Right. Yeah, that's the sad part of it. While it keeps the government open and it's a good option to do something quickly when you're out of time to pass a continuing resolution, what's continuing is the previous budget. They still haven't adopted them. No, it's a year into it. At some point, that becomes a legitimate knock. You get a 4-year term. If 25% of your term expires without your having influenced the federal budget, you might have a problem.
Particularly because the budget has been so slashed. Some agencies are working at like 40% of what they were pre-Trump. Social Security, IRS, all of the front-facing agencies have been really slashed back, but particularly those two. It's austerity. It's let's make government not work for the people, and they'll hate government, and they'll elect Republicans.
And the longer we continue the crisis and say we're rescuing ourselves from government shutdown with a continuing resolution, most people probably don't pay too much attention. They barely pay attention in some cases when the government does shut down, but they'll pay attention and note positively that the government's not shutting down, but it's a very stealthy way of continuing Trump budgeting numbers without without anybody noticing it. And besides which, it's being done by a Democratic Congress with a Democratic president, so they must be approving. They must approve of the budget levels, but they really don't. It's just that they can't get any cooperation in moving forward with an actual new budget. And the only thing they can do is limp along from CR to CR.
The countervailing force on this for Republicans could be defense contractors in the Pentagon, who are all getting just a little bit impatient with this because they actually got a good boost out of the House bill that passed, the House Defense Appropriations. It was $768 billion, which was $28 billion more than the Pentagon even asked for.
And they don't want to miss out on that.
They don't want to miss out on that. So there is growing unrest in the defense trade groups, and that could bring Republicans to the table to do an actual budget. That is sort of the only thing I see that's going to bring them around.
Well, we'll see if they can do that work and push people for that. They won't want to miss out on a big bonanza, especially with tensions rising. We could lose out on millions and billions in contracts on whatever standoff we generate over Ukraine. We have to get that money quickly. Come on, let us
so
through.
that's there you go, another countervailing pressure on Republicans. This is interesting to me. Senate Republicans seem to not want to side with Russia, unlike House Republicans, who are, why would we go in to help Ukraine? Because the Tucker Carlson divide in Congress, in the Republican Congress.
I guess I don't know what does it, although senators have always sort of fancied themselves more, statesmen and players in international relations by virtue of being the upper house and such. But, and of course, you have to play to a much larger constituency. So you always get the kookier kooks in the House. But it is interesting, that divide. And, of course, the Tucker Carlson going on TV with the we should be on the Russian side and all this. It's a new twist for conservatives. It's interesting to watch.
It is so bizarre, Kagro. I am really not understanding the 21st century.
No, it's not making a great deal of sense. And they had, I guess, for a while, the excuse of saying, well, the Russians, they're different now. It's not Soviets anymore. They're very different in their approach to things. And then, of course, I guess almost just to troll them, Putin and forces aligned with them making weird Soviet throwback flexes, including like invading Ukraine and absorbing it into the Russian Empire. Like, you don't remember this stuff? I don't know.
Remember when Republicans raised hell about using the term czar for a...
Yeah, right. That's true. And that was, it's pre-communist. What are you talking about? Why does that bother you so much? I don't know. It's very weird that they don't see that as, just out of keeping with their traditions as conservatives. But I don't know. Then again, they were all there for July 4th in Moscow, so I suppose all of that is out the window. It's a weird world we're living in, Joan.
I don't understand it anymore. I just don't.
Yeah, all we can do here is document the
atrocities.
The atrocities and the difficulties in understanding them. But I appreciate your coming by to do just that, and I'm glad we got to talk a lot about Idaho today, and also that you straightened some things out for us, so we get a better understanding of the reading we did. Appreciate it.
You are most welcome. I'll go back and find the definitive article on the takeover for you.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to read about that because honestly, that and the nuclear option. I love stealing Republican plans and turning them into Democratic ones and then watching them complain about it. So we'll see if we can do that with this
That's
one
what
too.
We'll do next week.
Yeah, okay. Everybody has to move to Wyoming. Thanks, Joan.
You're welcome.
See you then.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, and thank you for doing it. It's really more of a you problem than a me problem if you're listening to me in the morning. But if you want to change all that and listen to Justice in the Morning, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is up next. Probably a lot less focus on Idaho, but a lot more focus on, for instance, the Trump fake electors plot imploding. Stay tuned and find out more.